Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Perez, and I'm a senior associate at Scott Legal PC. Today, we will be spending some time talking about the TN visa requirements. Specifically, this webinar will clarify the requirements for obtaining a TN visa with a focus on the common misconceptions regarding sponsorship. Just a few things before we get started. Some of you may know that the firm was founded on an E2 visa several years ago. Our founder, Ian Scott, is in the US on an E2 visa and has been on several different visas, including an F1, a TN, B, and H1B. Scott Legal is a full-service immigration law firm, and we offer immigration services in several different areas, including E2, E1, TN, L1, family immigration, national interest waivers, EB5, extraordinary ability visas, and more. We will continue this webinar series doing at least 2 webinars a week on different topics. At the end of this webinar, we will send out several useful tools. We will send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation from today, a link where you can download guides that go through the visa options in more detail, and also a link where you can sign up for additional webinars. This webinar will be recorded and available on YouTube. We will also send the link for that. We encourage you to subscribe and hit the notification button as we regularly upload immigration videos on a wide variety of topics. We'll also send you a link where you can arrange a consultation with one of our experienced immigration attorneys if you would like to discuss your case in more detail. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So today we have 2 presenters with us. We are lucky to have Dustin Saldariaga and Yongki Hong as our presenters. Dustin is a senior associate with Scott Legal. He graduated from Harvard Law School and works on a number of different visas, including the TN visas. We also have Yongki, who is a senior associate here at Scott Legal and has over 15 years of experience working on employment-based visas. So without further delay, let us get started with the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Katie.
Mhm.
So let's get started. The TN visa is probably the best working visa for Canadian or Mexican nationals, except for those who wish to run their own businesses in the United States. You do not need to be born from Canada or Mexico, but you just need to have a passport from one of these 2 countries. But your profession must be one of the listed occupation in the TN regulations. For this matter, if you are at your computer right now, then please go to Google and type NAFTA TN regulations. Or you can simply type TN occupation list. Whatever you type it, you may click on any link that shows the list of TN visa occupations. Well, I click on the first thing I can see from Google search. It says ACFR 2146. Again, you may click on any other links that shows the full list of TN visa occupation. Once you click on that and scroll down, you see a list of occupations that starting with the accountant, architect, and about 60 other occupations. Even though there are many common occupations are listed, there are also some occupations not listed here. Like a good example might be a marketing related position. So your profession and your job must appear on this list in order to apply for a TN visa. And when I say you need to have a qualification, it is not your U.S. employer's requirement for the job, but U.S. employer may want the applicant to have 20 years of job experience for the particular position, but all you need to is just to have meet the visa TN visa requirement. I'll give you an example. If you see the economist, it says economists need a bachelor degree or licenciatura degree. Or accountant needs a bachelor's degree or licenciatura degree or CPA license. Management consultant needs a bachelor's degree or licenciatura degree or 5 years of experience in a field of specialty related to consulting agreement. Likewise, you have to carefully review which occupation you are going to use and apply for your TN visa, because each occupation has a slightly different way to meet the requirement. If we are not so sure, that you can always contact our firm to have us some private consultation, go through your qualification. So in order to apply for TN visa, you need to have several requirements. One is a pre-arranged job offer from U.S. employer. But definition of an employer is quite broad. It can be a solo proprietorships, LLC, or usual incorporation, C corps. However, you cannot use your own U.S. company offer a job to yourself. Such self-employment is prohibited. So if you are thinking about opening your own business in the United States, maybe E2 visa is better than TN options. But so in that case, you are not really able to support and sponsor your own TN visas. Your degree also must match the job description. It means you are coming to United States to perform activities matching with your profession occupation. An example is that a US company wants to hire you as a social media manager, and you have a bachelor degree in accounting. In that case, because the proposed job duties do not match with your degree, you may not be eligible for TN visa. Okay, move on, next. Then how do we know what kind of work a particular TN occupation title actually perform? For that matter, this slide shows you that the Department of Labor's occupation outlook. Well, in short, we call it OOH, but basically this is the website you can go in and take a look at which occupation title I need to use based on your job duties, because it shows all kind of job duties, how you're gonna become and what kind of job duties you're gonna perform as that kind of occupation. If you search a particular occupation from this website, then click on what they do section. Then you will see the most commonly performed job duties by the occupation. Whatever occupation you are applying, you should check this website to make sure that job duties you are going to perform should be substantially matching with this website. And Dustin will readdress this OOH website one more time when he takes over this presentation later. So it may be a good idea, keep this website open on your computer. Okay. Next slide. Then what is the sponsorship in terms of TN visa? One of the most common questions we get is whether TN visa requires a sponsorship. So in the US immigration world, the definition of a sponsorship often means the employer needs to test the labor market, whether there is a US worker willing to take the job, or US employer need to pay a prevailing wage, which is a lot higher than state minimum wage in many situations. Or when an employer lays off an H-1B employee, the employer needs to pay a transportation fee so that the H-1B employee can go back to the home country. Those kind of things we call it sponsorship in the US immigration world. The TN visa does not require any of them. For that reason, we could say TN visa does not require sponsorship. For TN visa, we just need a valid job offer from a US employer and sign the letter explaining the nature, position, and job duties. Then why they need this particular Canadian and Mexican nationals and employment durations and salary amount. Those kind of information should be in the written letter. But other than that, you don't need much other sponsorships. That letter is not binding though. If the applicant turns out to be not a good worker, then the employer has a right to terminate the employee anytime. The employer also has the same right to quit the job anytime if he does not like it. So basically, TN workers are almost identically treated as a US worker. But keep in mind that when applicant is already inside the United States and wish to file a change of status through USCIS, in that case, the employer is the one who is going to submit the application, which means if the case is denied, the denial record is on the employer. And if employee applies for TN visa at the border with the CBP, then if it is denied, then denial record is on employee individually. So with that in mind, let me turn it over to Dustin, who will guide you through the next part of our presentation, who will cover the differences between Canadian and Mexican nationals, as well as some of the more challenging TN categories. So please stay tuned.
Perfect. Thank you, Yanki. So Yanki gave a very helpful background on the TN visa, and as he mentioned, the TN is available only to nationals of Canada or Mexico. Again, meaning that you need to have a passport from either Canada or Mexico. You don't necessarily need to have been born there. So there are differences in terms of how nationals of Canada and Mexico can actually apply for the TN visa or TN status. Let's start with nationals of Mexico. Nationals of Mexico have the option to apply at a consulate abroad. And that's true whether the Mexican national is in the US or abroad. They can submit the application to the consulate, whether they're inside the US or whether they're abroad. And if they are inside the US, they'd have to travel to the consulate for their interview. So that's the first option, applying at a consulate. The second option, again available to nationals of Mexico, is to apply from within the US to US Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. And they would do that by filing the form I-129, or their employer filing the form I-129, as Yanki mentioned. And we'll talk about those options in more detail later in the presentation. For now, it's important to keep in mind that those two options, applying at a consulate or applying at USCIS, are also available for Canadians. So Canadians and Mexicans can apply at a consulate abroad or through USCIS. They can only apply through USCIS if they're physically inside the US. Now, a third option is available for nationals of Canada, which is to apply at a port of entry. Now, this is a very easy and relatively straightforward process. So most of the clients we have who are nationals of Canada are going to opt for an application being filed at the port of entry. And that makes sense. You don't need to wait for weeks or months to apply at a port of entry as you would if you applied at a consulate. It's also relatively inexpensive, far more inexpensive, far cheaper than applying through USCIS. And if you're admitted, you're immediately admitted. So your TN application is approved, you can immediately enter the US in TN status. So for nationals of Canada, applying at a port of entry is extremely convenient. When I say a port of entry, that means a land crossing, or it could also mean pre-flight inspection. So for example, at the Pearson Airport, or it could be another airport in the US. If you're flying in, say, to Atlanta or to Chicago or Los Angeles, that is also a port of entry. So it means an airport or it means a land crossing. So when a national enters the the U.S. in TN status, there is a difference between the visa validity and the TN status that they're given. So this can get a little bit confusing, but the important thing to know is that a visa, which is the actual stamp that's put in your passport, the visa is only relevant for seeking admission into the US. So a visa gives you the ability to ask the United States to let you enter. And for nationals of Canada, they can be given a TN visa for up to 3 years. Nationals of Mexico do have the option of getting a TN visa for up to 4 years. So that's a benefit that nationals of Mexico do have. Now that's the visa. Each time that a national of Canada or Mexico enters the US, they are given TN status, and that's shown on their I-94, and they can be given TN status for up to 3 years. So let's take an example. Let's say that a national of Mexico has a 4-year TN visa. When they enter the US, they're only going to be given up to 3 years of TN status. And when they're in the US, the visa is basically irrelevant. What matters is the I-94. So you always need to check your I-94 each time you enter and make sure you see 2 things. First of all, that you're given the status that you were expecting. So in this case, it's TN status. And second of all, that you keep in mind and write down the expiration date of your I-94, because if you stay in the US past your I-94 expiration date, you can accumulate unlawful presence. And what that means is you can face a bar if you accumulate enough unlawful presence. Now, I mentioned before that nationals of Canada almost always are going to apply at a port of entry. So when are they not going to apply at a port of entry? A national of Canada is oftentimes not going to apply to a port of entry if either they or their employer want to get a sense of the likelihood of them getting approved. So they might submit an application to USCIS just to see if USCIS will approve the application. And this is common if the person's already in the US and they want to gauge the likelihood of the application being approved. They might, instead of leaving and coming back through the port of entry, they might submit to USCIS and then leave and re-enter with that USCIS approval and get the visa at a port of entry. Or if a national of Canada has a spouse or a child who is not a national of Canada, meaning they don't have a passport from Canada, then that spouse or child must apply at a consulate. So ports of entry, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP at ports of entry, only has the ability to grant TN status to nationals of Canada. So if someone, say, is a national of India and is married to someone who's a national of Canada, that spouse who has Indian nationality would have to apply at a Canadian consulate. So if that's the case, you'll also oftentimes see that the national of Canada will want to accompany their spouse or their child to the consulate, and they'll just get the visa there with their dependent. All right. One last thing on nationals of Mexico. The consulates in Mexico do have a system where sometimes they will allow you to renew your TN visa by mail. You don't typically request this. Oftentimes you'll submit your application to the consulate and then they will let you know if you qualify to renew by mail and they'll send you instructions for that. But just be aware that might be an option if you're a national of Mexico renewing at the consulate. So Yongki mentioned before that in the TN regulations, there are literally dozens of professions listed, and each profession has different qualifications. Now, not all TN professions are as easy or as challenging to be approved for. And there are 2 professional categories that are particularly challenging. And they're challenging for very different reasons. So those 2 professions are management consultants and economists. So let's first talk about management consultants. The reason that management consultants have a hard time applying for TN visas is that this category, management consultants, is one of the very few for which you can qualify without having a baccalaureate degree or a licenciatura degree. So if someone has a passport from Mexico or Canada and they don't have a college degree, they are going to, by default, apply in the management consultant category. And the US government knows that. And so whenever they receive an application in this category, they are going to scrutinize the application. Now, that being said, 2 things. First of all, that does not mean that approvals in this category are not common. We regularly see approvals in the management consultant category. it is just important to keep certain things in mind about these applications, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The second point I want to make about management consultant applications is that they are not all innately risky. There is a spectrum. So at one end of the spectrum, applications that are not particularly risky in this category are people who are coming to the US to work for a management consulting company. So if, for example, you work for McKinsey in Mexico City, and you are seeking a TN visa to work for McKinsey in New York City, that is not going to be a risky or particularly challenging application because it's very straightforward. You establish that you're working for a management consulting firm in the US and that you are a management consultant. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, the applications that are risky are when you're coming to the US to work as a management consultant for a company that is not a management consulting firm. And the example I like to use is, let's say you are an expert in the design and manufacturing of solar panels. Let's say you're a national of Mexico and you have 2 decades of experience in manufacturing solar panels. There is a solar panel company in the United States that wants to hire you to consult on its manufacturing processes. That is going to be a challenging application because the company in the US is a solar panel company. It's not a management consulting company. That being said, there are certain things you can do to strengthen your application to make it clear that you really are coming to the US to work as a management consultant. So let's talk about what those are. The first thing I'll say is it's very helpful in these applications where you're coming to the US to work for a company that's not a management consulting firm, but you're seeking that management consultant category. It's very important to keep in mind what a traditional management consulting arrangement looks like. So think about when McKinsey is hired by a company in the United States, what does that arrangement look like? Typically, the management consultant is not going to become an employee of the company that's hiring McKinsey. All right. So if say Apple hires McKinsey to advise it, Apple is not going to typically put the McKinsey consultant on Apple's payroll. They're going to pay McKinsey. McKinsey is going to pay the consultant. And that kind of arrangement is what you want to see in the TN arrangement for an applicant here. So let's go back to our example of the solar panel company. The solar panel company is likely going to hire, quote, I'm going to use the word hire, the consultant from Mexico as an independent contractor. That consultant, there is probably going to be a consulting agreement between the US company and the consultant, the individual. So that consulting agreement is oftentimes going to define exactly what the management consultant is going to do. In months 1 through 3, they're going to analyze the manufacturing process. In months 4 through 6, they're going to offer their recommendations to management at the US company. In months 7 through 9, they are going to monitor the implementation of those recommendations, and they're going to be paid for specific deliverables. That looks like a traditional consulting arrangement, and that is what the government typically expects to see in these management consultant arrangements. Contrast that to an application where the solar panel company is saying, we want to hire this Mexican national full-time, 40 hours a week. We're going to pay them $100,000. They are going to have the title of management consultant at our company, and they're on our payroll. That does not look like a traditional management consulting agreement. That's going to be a risky application. Now, importantly, what I'm saying has to mirror reality. So if you have a consulting agreement with someone, that needs to actually be what they're expected to do, the time frame they're expected to perform along, and the compensation that they're expected to pay. So just because the company and the applicant are willing to enter this agreement, even if it isn't aligned with what is actually going to happen on the ground. You can't do that. So do be careful to not misrepresent your intentions to the government. That is a very big problem. If you do that, could compromise future applications, could get you in a lot of trouble, both the employer and the employee or the independent contractor. So make sure anything you represent to the government, anything you say to the government is actually what you expect to do with your worker, or you as the worker, what you expect to do at the employer. So I will also say these, more than other categories, management consultant applications and the economist applications, which we'll talk to in a second, really do benefit from an immigration lawyer helping you navigate them. There are a number of things to keep in mind here. So do reach out if you're planning on following this path, especially if it's for a consulting or a company in the US that's not a consulting company. You see on the screen, I'm going to just quickly say one last thing on the management consulting category. It says, unless the applicant is coming to work for a management consulting firm, the position must be supernumerary. That's a word you never hear, but the government uses it. And what it basically means is what I was saying in terms of the person not filling a permanent role. So if they're coming as a management consultant, again, think about McKinsey. That McKinsey consultant's not going to fill a permanent role at Apple, just as the Mexican national should not be filling a permanent role at the solar panel company. They're coming to advise on something for a limited period of time. And last note on this, that limited period of time, one of the things that can strengthen these applications is if you make it clear you're only seeking TN status for the period of time you need to actually perform the task at hand, to consult on the specific challenge at hand. So asking for 3 years as a management consultant can be risky. So define the specific challenge that needs to be addressed, why you are the ideal person to consult on that challenge, and narrow the time frame you're asking for to what you actually need to address the challenge. So let's talk about economists. The economist category is challenging for completely different reasons from the management consulting category. In 2017, the government issued a policy memo that basically narrowed what the government thinks economists do. So Yankee mentioned before the Occupational Outlook Handbook. It is really important, especially important for the economist category, to go on the Occupational Outlook Handbook, search for OOH economist, and actually see the job duties that the OOH, which is a publication of the US Department of Labor, what the government thinks economists do. So if you click the tab at the top that says what they do under economists, you'll see a list of job duties. They research economic issues, they conduct surveys, collect data, analyze that data using mathematical models, statistical tools. They interpret and forecast trends, they advise businesses, etc. So if you're coming to the US as an economist, you want to make sure your job duties at the US employer are aligned with the job duties in the Occupational Outlook Handbook. At the same time, you want to make sure your job duties are not what financial analysts do and what market research analysts do. So that 2017 memo specifically said that financial analysts are not economists for purposes of the TN visa, and market research analysts are not economists for purposes of the TN visa. In the past, before 2017, people would come in the economist category and they would work as financial analysts and market research analysts. Financial analysts in general work for financial institutions to find ways to maximize profits. So helping banks figure out where to invest funds, for example. Market research analysts, they basically help companies market their goods and services. For both of those categories, you can go on the Occupational Outlook Handbook and read the job duties. And it's helpful to do that because by looking at the OOH page for financial analysts and market research analysts, you can see what the government will not approve in the economist category. So make sure your job duties are aligned with what economists do on OOH and not what financial analysts and market research analysts do. All right, so we talked before about the 3 options to apply for a TN visa. Those are USCIS for those who are inside the US, a consulate for really anyone. You can apply at a consulate. And finally, ports of entry if you're a national of Canada. So let's go into a few more details on how to actually follow these paths. So as I mentioned, Canadians can apply to port of entry. Basically, what they would do is they would provide their TN application. What does that consist of? So typically it is a handful of things. TN applications, looking at the scope of U.S. immigration law, TN applications certainly are simpler and more straightforward than other options. Almost any visa option, which is in part why Yankee said at the beginning of this presentation that the TN visa is a wonderful option for nationals of Canada or Mexico who want to work in the US. If someone comes to us and says they're a national of Canada or Mexico, they have a job offer from a US employer, the TN is going to be the first option we consider because it is just so straightforward, so relatively simple compared to other visa options. And as a result, people do apply for TN visas without hiring an immigration firm to help them with that. And those applications are regularly approved. I will say, though, that the categories we talked about before, economists and management consultants, do benefit from help from an immigration lawyer. And of course, we help clients applying in a variety of professional categories and are happy to do that. So what is in the TN application? The central part of a TN application is the employer letter. So this is a letter written and signed by the US employer that describes a few things. The first thing it describes is who they are as the US employer. What do they do? What do they sell? How big they are? What their most recent revenue figures were? How many employees they have? And that section is establishing that the US employer is active and does have a need for the TN employee. The second part of the letter is going to be what the job is that the US employer is looking to fill. So we are looking to fill a role for an economist, and we need an economist because we need A, B, and C. So they're going to say what the economist is going to be doing. Again, it's important that those job duties be aligned with the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and why the employer needs someone in that role. The next section of the letter, the employer letter, is going to be about the applicant, who the person is, the national of Canada or Mexico, who is looking to come to the US to work for the employer. That section is going to talk about how that person qualifies. And again, as Yankee said, this is qualifying as a TN applicant. So to figure that out, you need to look at the regulations. And you need to explain, okay, this economist is qualifying based on their degree, and laying that out. The reason that is important, and I'll just quickly reiterate this because this does come up a lot, and I'm echoing what Yankee said. So an economist, to qualify for a TN visa, they must qualify based on their degree. There is no other option. If you look at the regulations, it says economist, baccalaureate, or licenciatura degree. So if your TN application says, John Doe is a national of Canada and they are qualifying for this job because they've been doing this for 30 years and they are a leader in the field of economics that they practice, that application will be denied because you cannot qualify based on experience if you're applying as an economist. You must focus on the fact that they do have the degree that qualifies them. So you would make it very clear John Doe is applying as an economist. He qualifies for the TN because he has a baccalaureate degree in economics. Quick side note, if that degree is from the United States, Canada, or Mexico, you do not need a separate academic equivalency certificate that basically says what the US equivalency, what the US equivalent is of that degree. If your degree is from anywhere else in the world, then you do need that academic equivalency certificate. So just to use a slightly crazy example, if someone has a PhD from the London School of Economics, one of the most prestigious schools in the world, they still need that academic equivalency certificate because the London School of Economics is not in the US, Canada, or Mexico. So keep that in mind. So that letter, to return to our employer letter, it will explain how the applicant qualifies for the profession. So again, qualifies in the TN sense. Now, it is fine if after they make it clear, after the letter makes it clear, this person qualifies because they have a baccalaureate degree. It's fine if they go on after that and say, in addition, they have 20 years, 30 years of experience, so they are a perfect fit for our company. And the letter should do that because it makes the letter more robust, but it's just very important that the letter not confuse what the TN qualification is from the employer's qualification. Because believe it or not, government officers can and oftentimes will be confused by that. And if they think you're trying to qualify on a grounds that is not in the regulations, the application is likely to be denied. Finally, that letter is going to talk about how long the job offer is for, up to a maximum of 3 years, how much the person will be paid, and importantly, that letter needs to be on company letterhead and needs to have the original signature if you're applying at a consulate or the port of entry. And the reason for that is consulates and ports of entry, U.S. Customs and Border Protection regularly encounter fraud. So you want to make sure to have original signatures and original versions of your documentation so that you're not rejected or denied simply based on not having those originals. If you're applying at USCIS, copies are fine. In fact, they typically don't want you to send in originals to USCIS. So what else needs to be in the TN application? In addition to the employer letter, you want to have, of course, your original passport. You also need, as I mentioned, you need to have original documentation showing how you qualify. So that is going to differ, that's going to depend on how you're qualifying. So if you're qualifying as an economist, again, you must have that degree. So you need to bring your original diploma with you to the consulate or to the port of entry, depending on how you're applying. If you are qualifying based on experience, which management consultants can qualify based on experience, you need letters written from your past employers that are talking about the amount of time that you worked as a management consultant. And those letters need to be, again, on official letterhead and to have the original signature. If you're qualifying based on a license, for example, accountants can qualify based on having a CPA license, then you need to have an original version of that license. Similar to lawyers. Lawyers can qualify based on membership in a state or provincial bar, so they need to have original documentation of that. A slight side note is let's talk about qualifying based on a degree. One of the common questions that comes up is, can you, let's say can you qualify based on a degree that is only somewhat related to the profession or even completely unrelated to the profession? The answer is, at the end of the day, your degree needs to be related to the profession. So here's the more complete answer to that, though, which is, let's say you're applying as an economist. Economists, again, can only qualify based on having a degree, a baccalaureate or a licenciature degree. If they have a master's or a PhD, that's fine. So baccalaureate or licenciature is the base qualification. A PhD degree is going to be fine. But let's say that they have a baccalaureate degree in English. They satisfy the requirement. The regulations only say you need a baccalaureate or a licenciature degree. And that's true. The regulations are not explicit that you need a degree related to your field, that you need a degree in economics. They don't say that. In fact, one of the only professions that says that is hotel manager. So if you look at hotel manager, it says baccalaureate or licenciature degree in hotel or restaurant management, which would make you think that for other categories, you don't need a degree related to that field. But unfortunately, that's not how the government does it. The government is going to require that you have a degree related to your field. So for economists, ideally, you're going to have a bachelor's degree in economics. If you have that, you meet the requirement. But what if your degree is in math or in statistics or in finance, which is related to economics, but is not an economics degree? You can certainly apply with those degrees, but what I would recommend is that you make it very clear in your application that you've completed coursework that qualifies you to work as an economist. And sometimes the Occupational Outlook Handbook can be helpful here. So if we go to the Economist page on the Occupational Outlook Handbook, you could do this by Googling OOH Economist and click How to Become One at the top. Let's see if this actually says it. I haven't looked at this lately. Okay, so okay, good. So it says here under education, candidates who have a bachelor's degree with sufficient course credits in economics, statistics, or mathematics may qualify for some entry-level economist positions. That's really helpful information for you, really helpful language for you if you don't have an economics degree, but you have a math degree or you have a statistics degree. You can quote this language from the Occupational Outlook Handbook in your application or in the employer letter. They can quote this language. The other thing I recommend you do is include a copy of your transcript and actually go through your transcript and highlight the classes you took that were related to economics. If you really, and we've done this for applicants in the past, if you really have a degree, let's say you have an English degree and you're applying as an economist, that's going to be a very difficult application to be approved. But if that were your only option, there are ways that you can navigate that. What we have done in the past is gotten letters from the academic advisor at the university or from a dean at the university talking about the classes that the person completed, even though they studied, for example, I'm going to use a made-up example. If they studied English, but they wrote their thesis in some way related to economics. And in their summers, they did independent research on economics and they took a bunch of classes in economics, even though they don't have an economics degree. You may be able to make that argument, especially if you have a letter from the school. You can bolster that application. It's still going to be risky, but it does mean you may be able to be approved based on a related degree. All right, I've spent a lot of time on that. That's your TN application is the employer letter, proof of how you qualify, or again, original documentation if you're at a border or a consulate, copies if you're applying through USCIS, and your passport. So National of Canada would approach the port of entry, would say, I'm applying for TN status. I have a job offer. The CBP officer will say, okay, great, give me your application. They'll look at the letter. They'll ask you some questions, likely about your qualifications, what job duties you're going to have in the US. And if you're approved, you may get a stamp or you're admitted into the US, you're issued an electronic I-94, and you can start working for the TN employer. So that is by far the fastest, most straightforward option for applying. Some ports of entry are optimized for faster TN processing. So it's always a good idea to find out which ports of entry are optimized. We're happy to help with that. It's always helpful to call ahead of time to make sure you know when the port of entry is open, if they have any unique procedures for TN applications, and then to navigate the process from there. And again, we're happy to help with all of that. Nationals of Mexico, as I mentioned, must apply at a consulate. Canadians can apply at a consulate if they want to. The application process to do that, step one is to file an online form DS-160 that's submitted to the consulate. You would pay your application fee. You would be scheduled to come in to give your fingerprints and photos, and you'll be invited for an interview. And the interview is in many ways similar to the conversation with the border officer, asking you about the US employer, what your job duties will be, how you qualify, things like that. If you're approved, you'll actually get a visa put in your passport, and you'll be able to enter and exit the US for the duration of that visa's validity period. Again, each time you enter on the visa, you're given TN status, and you need to check your I-94 to make sure you know how long you can stay. And finally, an option available to both nationals of Mexico and Canada is to apply from within the US through USCIS. And as Yankee mentioned, technically it's the US employer that files this application. It is not the employee or the TN applicant, the individual worker. And it is the employer that would file the I-129 with USCIS. One of the convenient things about applying with USCIS is that you can opt for premium processing. That will give you a decision within 15 business days. It is expensive. It costs $2,805. But if you need a decision quickly and you don't want to travel, you don't want to leave the US, that is going to be probably the best option for you. And again, the employer would file that application and would include supporting documentation, copies of supporting documentation. We can go ahead. All right, so we did, common tips and pitfalls. We talked about a lot of these, so it's always helpful to call the port of entry ahead of time, just to make sure you're familiar with the procedures. A helpful tip that doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it's helpful to do this. Ask the person who signed your employer letter to be available by phone at the time you plan to either go to the consulate for your interview or approach the port of entry to enter if you're entering through a port of entry. That's because sometimes the government officer will actually call that person really just to make sure the job offer is legitimate. So it's helpful to just give your employer a heads up and ask them to have their phone on them. Again, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it's really helpful to do that. Bring originals, your original diploma, official transcripts, and original signed version of the employer letter if you're applying at a port of entry or the consulate. I say just it's not worth wasting your time bringing copies. Don't spend all the time pulling together an application only to be denied because you have copies. Take the time to get the originals. And finally, the TN visa is a non-immigrant visa. That means a temporary visa. It's not a green card. And so technically you cannot use a TN visa for the purpose of entering the US and then applying for a green card. So you may be asked questions about your intention to leave the US at the end of your TN visa. Typically, these questions don't come up until you have renewed your TN visa 2 or 3 times. If you're, in year 8, 9, 10 of your TN, you might get questions about whether you actually plan to leave eventually. But otherwise, these questions aren't likely to come up. It is a good idea just to be prepared. So bring documents showing that you have a bank account in Canada or Mexico, that there are funds in the bank account. If you have property in Canada or Mexico, it's a good idea to have proof of that property. Again, just if questions come up. They're not likely to come up, but if they do, it's helpful to have that. And at the end of the day, this oftentimes is not something to worry about because unless you actually are planning to enter to apply for a green card. So don't do that. And if you are interested in a green card, schedule a consultation with us because it is possible to apply for a green card while in TN status, but it is a challenging path to navigate and really does benefit from having a qualified lawyer guide you through that process. There are some pitfalls to be aware of. But if you are not planning to apply for a green card and you're just renewing your TN visa, for year 8, 9, or 10, I really would encourage you not to be worried. Come prepared, but if your intent is not to seek a green card, then typically CBP or the consulate will understand that. And really what is prohibited is entering the US with the intention of adjusting status, meaning that you're applying within the US for lawful permanent resident status. So, the fact that you might eventually want a green card, that's not what the test is. The test is not even, are you going to apply for a green card at a consulate? That should also be permitted. But again, it's helpful to be aware of pitfalls. So schedule a consultation if that applies to you. With that, go ahead and send in any questions you have. I know we did get one question, but if anyone else has questions, we have a few minutes. So the TN is an accountant, bachelor's in commerce degree is in accounting, and I have credentials verified by a third party. Also, I've done 1-year diploma majors in accounting. Well, so what we're going to do for any of these cases, we in our webinars we don't get into the specifics of individual audience members for privacy reasons, and also that's better suited for a consultation, so we can have a back and forth over the specific questions of your circumstances. So do schedule a consultation, but for the purposes of the presentation, I'll just walk you through how we would go about answering the question, and what I would recommend you do is to go to the TN regulations and look at accountant. So an accountant requires a baccalaureate or a licenciatura degree or a professional license, such as a CPA. So if you have a bachelor's in commerce degree in accounting and you have credentials, then what you're going to do is you're going to make the argument that you have that bachelor's degree. And I would recommend you include your transcript, since it is a bachelor's in commerce degree and not a bachelor's in accounting degree. I think it's helpful to look at the transcript and really emphasize all of the classes you took that qualify you for the role. Okay, I think that's it, unless any other questions came in. Perfect. So I think, Katie, we can go ahead and wrap up if you'd like, or I'm happy to do that.
Uh, you can go ahead and do it.
Sure, sure. So thank you all in our audience for the question and for your participation today. Do keep an eye out for that email that will be sent to you that Katie mentioned before. It will have a link where you can schedule a consultation. It will also have a link to our YouTube channel where we put some great high quality information for free on our YouTube channel. We also on our YouTube channel put the full length recordings of our webinars. So just some really good information on our YouTube channel. Our website has an extensive blog with thousands of posts. You can get great information there as well. And that'll be in the email we'll send to you. And finally, that email will have a comprehensive guide to the TN visa. So take some time with that information, schedule a consultation if you have any questions at all. Yankee and Katie, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and time. And we hope to see you all soon. Stay well in the meantime.
Thank you.
Thank you.